So, hi, Dr. Horsley. Our group decided to choose prompt 4 to have an open discussion and dialogue um, about the color hierarchies and casting in mainstream, non-mainstream films. Um, to start off, we were talking about the scar of shame and kind of that tragic mulatto trope.
In Scar of Shame, you have the ingenue who's running away from her darker skinned lover into this like light skinned family, who's able to protect her and able to give her the resources to be safe. And it's continuing to perpetuate this idea that the lighter you are, the closer you are to God, like going back to Paradise Lost, like the darker you are, the like more full of sin you are. So it's nothing new. It's just recycling the same understanding of race that already exists just within a specific community that's already oppressed.
Mhm.
I agree with that. And I just feel like completely that it's like nothing new, but that also I feel like a lot of the times we have made progress and people, realize we have made progress, but also there's so many undertones and so many like little story plots that are always happening in these movies that are very similar. People kind of slide under the radar, or the way that people are cast in Hollywood, even still now, are flying under the radar, and that typically it's lighter skinned people who will be cast in a role, even if they're darker skinned. Or I remember one time we were talking in class about Nina Simone, and
Yes,
Zoe Saldana.
Saldana.
Mm-hmm. And they were talking, and they cast her to play her, even though she was like so much lighter and looked nothing like her, and they used prosthetics. And it's like, at the time, it was like, oh wow, even at the time it was bad, but like that idea was like, oh wow, they're highlighting a Black woman, they're telling a Black woman's story, they're using a Black actress now, like great, but it's still like completely messed up and just ridiculous.
Mhm.
Right. And it's going back to this very basic and harmful misconception that Black people are a monolith. But at the same time, it's erasing the diversity within the Black communities.
Mhm.
I agree. I feel like the undertone of when people are casting someone like a light skinned person play dark skinned person, it's saying that these two very different kind of people are interchangeable, and it's like people aren't interchangeable, their experiences are interchangeable, and it'd be akin to like having a Chinese person, like their story being played by like a Japanese person. It's not the same thing. It's people who are of like a similar culture, but completely different experiences. Completely, like they're just not the same thing.
And I feel like, for example, like the Nina Simone casting, what audience was that intended for truly? And like I don't know enough about like the movie. I never even seen it, but
White Nina Simone fans probably.
yeah, and it's like it's interesting because you say like there's like these incomplete truths, right? These untold truths, there's an incomplete story. And that just makes me think about like as in like if it is like a Black audience, um, and it's like Black spectatorship, how much emotional and mental labor has to go into viewing this film and adapting people's lived experiences and truths to an incomplete story portrayed in like mainstream movies.
If we go back to Black tropes of Uncle Tom, Coon, Tragic Mulatto, like those are very specific tropes created for white people to get a lens into the Black community to support their understanding, their perception of reality. And also, if you go back to Commedia dell'arte, like we have these created because not only are they funny, but they're based in a perception of truth that doesn't challenge the audience's understanding of how the world works. And so if we're thinking of art as a means for entertainment solely, and the audience is white, then there's no challenging of the stories that need to be told.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like kind of like especially like in the evolution of these films and like A Nation Rising as a form of entertainment versus if we think about like Black exploitation, I mean I can't speak for like every single like white individual audience member, but like as a white spectator, I feel like there's a considerable amount of guilt, like white guilt and like white fragility at play, and uncomfortability. And so, on the one hand, I think about like movies as like, oh, like fun entertainment, as a form of escapism. Yet, for example, like with blaxploitation films that aren't necessarily catered or developed for the white gaze, I think that's something that's really interesting to think about. And I think that speaks to where like Black cinema will go in the future, and kind of like talking about, oh my God, I hate like being uncomfortable with the uncomfortable, like that whole like all that, like a lot of those, that kind of language coming, like moving forward with like what has happened with like Black Lives Matters, and a lot of that was like trending on like social media.
There's definitely a lot of, you made one point that stuck out to me. There's definitely like an element of not wanting to make like white people too uncomfortable with media. Like there, I don't know when that's gonna go away, but there's like, in I feel like in like films that are made for black people in a black audience, even still, like there's just like always a little bit of like, we want to make them feel bad, but we don't want to like hurt their feelings too much and piss them off.
Just thinking about the future of mixed race narratives, or like the passing narrative. I mean, I'm mixed race, I'm black and white. I think of I'm an actor, and I'm thinking about what stories can I tell, should I tell, do I want to tell? um, and it's fascinating to think about the history of passing or just being light. And I'm hoping that we get to a point, and I kind of hope for my own self that I'll help create more art or stories about mixed race narratives, because so far the only narrative is the passing narrative, or this uncomfortable like racial dilemma of like, am I white enough or am I black enough, this like idea of like being enough for a community. But it's very possible to have a healthy racial identity and be mixed. And I think that's really missing right now. A racial identity is a personal one, and it's also one that is put upon you. So like those in and of itself are two things that work in synthesis, or they may be two things in conflict. Like if you look at Plessy from Plessy v. Ferguson, like he was 7/8 white, 1/8 black, and he was still black enough to start that entire process to Brown versus the Board of Education, to segregation and integration. So as the definitions and the criteria for race change, and as we get more racial mixtures, and it's like inevitably it will change. But I don't necessarily think these systems of white supremacy will change because of the demographics. I think it will have to be a conscious, intentional shift in how we're in dismantling all the institutions that are so steeped in white supremacy, in order for us to like actually get real change.
Just a major takeaway is like, this is it. Like this, we're discussing a very real like problem that needs to be
Right.
like talked about.
I think, I mean, if you guys are happy closing this here, if we want to discuss more.
I'm good.
Cool. It's been nice talking with you guys.
Yeah, so nice. That was such a like generative conversation. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you.